Hello, and welcome to Red Rock Relationships, a podcast about communication. Let's unpack the relationships that we encounter in our daily lives and learn about what makes them tick. And now your host for Red Rock Relationships, Dr. James B. Stein.
It's me, and it's the end of the semester, which is crazy to me because I feel like we just started like 2 weeks ago, but it always goes down like that, I suppose. Now, I am here on the season finale of, God, what is this, season 9? Season 9.
Wow.
I know. And in a rare change of events, I have an in-person guest with me. So we've been talking about, technology and how technology influences relationships broadly. And because of guest booking schedules, this was actually the first episode I wanted to do, but the other people needed to be shifted around, and you're physically here. Mm-hmm. So I moved this episode around the rest, but I think it'll be a nice note to end on. We're mostly going to be talking today about social comparisons, and to help me do that is UT Com professor Dr. Shelley Rawlins. Shelley, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
My pleasure. And it's about time, too, because you've been here this is the end of your second year now, right?
Yes.
That's pretty crazy. Time flies and is a flat circle. So, because it's your first time on the show, we are going to do just a really brief kind of intro and background, who you are, what you study, just super casual. And then we'll get into our topic of the day. How's that?
Sounds great.
All right. If you could, your elevator speech.
Sure, yeah. So my name is Shelley Rawlins, she, her, hers, pronouns. Happy to be here, finishing my second year at Utah Tech. I teach courses such as gender communication, ethics, small group, and this semester I taught globalization, culture, and identity. Very much fun. My research revolves around protest and people power, and I guess maybe more specifically or perhaps more broadly about how strangers encounter each other in the world, and I guess some of the appraisals that we make about people that we're not familiar with. And perhaps one of the more enlightening things I've kind of picked up thinking about strangers over the years is when you meet a stranger, you're a stranger to them as well. It's a very dialogic experience. Like sometimes we look at people a little bit strange because we don't know them, but they're also looking at us, looking at them. So, it's a relational construct.
And I think we're going to dive into a lot of that feeling and phenomenon here in just a second. Mm-hmm. Now, like I said, the theme for this season, this last season here, has been technology, robots, AI, all that kind of fun stuff. We've had some really interesting episodes, and this one is a little bit more of like a broad kind of like seeing the forest for the trees, 30,000-foot approach. Mm-hmm. I want to start by just talking about social comparisons in general, because shockingly, I was going over my notes for like the entirety of this podcast, and we haven't really spent any time discussing what they are, which is funny because in like intro to interpersonal comm classes, it's like one of the first things we go over. Mm-hmm. So can you speak just briefly about like what social comparisons are? Are they good? Are they bad? Are they somewhere in between? What are your thoughts there generally?
Sure. Just starting with social comparison theory, the idea there is, the assumption made is that people compare themselves to other people to kind of appraise and evaluate how well they're doing or how poorly they're doing. The presumption there is that's a natural fact of life, and I agree with that 100%. Growing up, if we think of social construction along with social comparison, we're a very visual, relational animal. So for me, when I think of social comparison, I think of, whether we're choosing something like towards an upward comparison, if we're comparing ourselves to things that we kind of already know are better than us or more successful or popular, or if we compare ourselves to like a downward comparison where we end up, like I watch court TV a lot. I love those court shows, and sometimes it's just very...
Judge Judy, Judge Joe Brown, and the like.
Oh my gosh, Judge Joe Brown.
Joe Brown?
He's not on there anymore, but he used to be.
Know.
But yeah, sometimes just watching, two people who just can't get past this microwave, that was left in the apartment, and like whose it is, and it's over $200. Comparing myself to that is like, I don't have any problems this deep or this trivial.
So those are the two types of comparisons that we make, upward and downward.
Yeah.
And I think it's also important to just put a little bow on that by saying, like, when we make these comparisons, we're often intentional about the groups and people we choose, right? Like, we're usually not just comparing ourselves to strangers. We have comparison groups like friends and family and media figures and things like that, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of what social comparisons are. What's your take on the valence of social comparisons? Are they good? Are they bad, positive, negative? Or are they kind of like like conflict, for example, where it's like a tool that can be good or bad? What do you think?
Well, I mean, before considering the valence of it, I'd kind of appreciate the inevitability of it. Like, we're always going to be doing this. And when I think about if it's good or bad, I think it depends on how old you are. Like, I find myself less concerned. I'm 41. I find myself less concerned with comparing myself to other people the older I get, but I also am privileged to have like a cool career, you know.
Right. And,
Yeah.
I'm 27.
Love that. Totally are. Yeah.
But no, I think that, I think
Yeah.
you make a really good point,
Yeah.
and it's gonna dovetail really nicely with my next question, because as we develop, as our brains get more settled, as our career paths become more visible and concrete,
and our identity gets,
and our identity becomes solidified,
Yeah.
we don't feel as much of a pressing urge. However, when it comes to, for example, adolescents or young adults, not only are they around more people who, like, it's possible for them to compare themselves to, they're far less developed, they have far less certainty in their lives, and therefore we fall back on those comparisons. Now, when you tie in the online world, things get even more complicated. So my next question is, when we make social comparisons to people in online spaces, and I'm trying to be as broad as I can because there's a ton of online spaces, but when we are in online spaces, are there any unique or distinct social comparisons that we tend to make that, for example, we might not make in face-to-face settings?
Sure. I think, you know, with the internet, you have access to contexts, worlds, mansions, etc. that we would, you know, if you think about, I don't know, 50 years ago, maybe even 30 years ago, but people would kind of live their entire lives in the same town, and, you know, that people often wouldn't travel as much. And so it wasn't as much of a globalized world or an interconnected world. So you might not have access to things that make you feel like that you're not as successful as you thought, and that can affect your happiness, right, and your contentment. So, you know, with the internet, now we see more what we don't have, and that kind of impels us or compels us to be envious or to be jealous, right?
Right.
And I was just looking up like envy and jealousy because those are important interpersonal, concepts. But, envy is when someone else has something that you want that you don't have, and jealousy is your fear of losing something that you want to keep.
Right.
And so I think that it introduces new thresholds of possibilities of things that you don't have that are like unattainable for the average person, but but I mean, I'm happy to admit, like, I was just watching The Real Housewives of New Jersey.
Okay, that I had to ask.
Season 4, so like way old, right? But like this is not that fascinating. Sorry about this, but it's the season after like Teresa and Joe Giudice build their like insane mansion, and then they had to file bankruptcy, and I mean, there's some sort of little bit of pleasure,
a little bit of what the Germans would call Schadenfreude.
Oh,
yeah, it's when you take pleasure in another person's suffering, but it's like it's not
yeah,
that it's not
sounds
dark
like
like
that. Sounds like shooting Freud,
kind of.
Right?
I don't know exactly where the etymology of the word.
But Freud also has this idea of melancholia, and it's like, I know it through Judith Butler, but she talks about like an unmourned loss is what melancholia is.
Yeah,
so like you realize
yeah.
there's something that you didn't have, that you never knew that you could have had, but you definitely don't have it.
Right, or something you missed out on.
Yeah.
This reminds me of, oh man, this must have been 3 years ago. We did an episode on parasocial relationships with Dr. Mark Generous, and one of the things we talked about there were these like lofty comparisons where we're like, well, I have a relationship with this person in so much as I interact with them, and if I interact with them, then I'm part of their world, and if I'm part of their world, I'm part of their celebrity, and like these are like the weird little online comparisons that we might make where we don't really have the ability to do that with like friends or family per se.
Yeah. So we can, in a lot of ways we can stylize the types of comparisons we want to make.
Yeah, especially when sorry to interrupt, but you got me thinking about the algorithm, right? And so now the algorithm can feed us what
Make it
types,
seem like so many more people have everything that you don't have. That you
right,
want. Yeah.
right. Yeah, it can tell us what types of social comparisons we ought to be making. And even though we guide the algorithm,
Or maybe we
with our
make one
choices,
and then it floods us.
That's what I'm
with
saying.
so then it exaggerates the frequency, right?
Yeah, and I imagine that can lead to some dread,
Death scrolling.
doom scrolling,
Doom scrolling, yeah.
Just
Death
same-
scrolling, yeah. It's
same
even
thing.
worse than doom, yeah.
All right, let's bring it back into relationships, because this
Sure.
is a podcast about relationships broadly. Now, we have spent a lot of time this season and just like in this show overall talking about online dating, because it's so prevalent, especially with young adults. So, my next question is, when it comes to like daters or even like people just in relationships, especially like newer fledgling relationships, I want to talk about dyadic comparison. What risks might we run into in comparing our relationship to other relationships, like specifically online relationships? And I'll give you brownie points because I'm thinking of one, but I'll give you brownie points if you could think of like maybe something good that can come from it. Because I'm trying to not be all negative.
Yeah,
But
sure.
yeah, so what sorts of comparisons do you think we might run into as we do relationships and then like observe additional relationships in the online space?
Sure. I mean, typically when people are, I'm not a big online poster. I'll just say that.
Fair.
I was in, undergrad when Facebook started, was on that. And so, just seeing the ways that people post just good news, right? And just good things. And yeah, so I can see the tendency to, like maybe if you're sitting there looking at the computer and you're not feeling great about your relationship, you're seeing this other relationship that appears too good to be true.
Yeah.
I mean, it is.
All the other relationships look super duper happy and we're in conflict. So
but you see this whole, we're humans, things don't always work out. The divorce rates and the dropping, marriage rates, like people aren't necessarily meant to be together forever, is my view. And I think it's important for people to realize that. But, I see on social media, these like idealized relationships play out, end up with divorce, start with those beautiful pictures in Greece and talking trash, and then, so yeah, I think it's just important to be realistic. I'm more impressed when I see people in relationships that are public and sharing their stuff online when they discuss some of their vulnerabilities, some of their struggles.
That's so hard to do.
It is.
So hard to do.
It is, yeah, but it makes sense to me to be more realistic. I tend to be more private in my relationships with people just because I'm grown and I don't really care. You know what I mean? Like what other people think. I care about what the people I know and that I care about think.
But they already probably know about your significant others and your dating life and all that stuff. So no, it's a really good point. I think the publicization, the making of relationships public is something that you're either all in on or you're not in on at all. And I think if you're someone in that latter category, looking at people in the former category, you can be like, whoa, these people are going on vacations and they're posting appreciation posts and my partner doesn't do that and I don't do that. Is there something wrong with my relationship? And I think that can be a nasty rabbit hole to fall down. But with respect, I think that can also be good.
Yeah.
I think about people in abusive relationships, right? And they see people experiencing happiness and things in their relationship and they go, oh, it's not normal for your partner to lash out at you constantly or something like that. And that can maybe help pull them out of a dark space. But it's a very yin-yang situation, I think.
But thinking about, positive aspects of that, I think that's when you move past just the goal maybe of portraying a happy, positive relationship and I like to watch people doing interesting activities, right? Like a DIY thing, building something, making something, or like volunteering somewhere. You know, when I see people doing good things, good deeds, philanthropy, volunteering their time at soup kitchens that maybe aren't exploiting the people that are there, but focusing on like, you could do this too, right? Like
Right.
that. And then there's kind of, almost this mixture of like, I could do that. And you feel a little bit of guilt, but you also feel like positive. I really like to see people doing wonderful things for others. And that, I think that's a healthy like guilt. If that, maybe that's the wrong word.
Yeah,
right?
I know
I
exactly.
could do that.
Yeah, you get motivated.
But seeing people in relationships go out and doing things together, and then seeing like the strength of that bond and the ability of two people to be able to do more together, I think is inspiring. And so when it moves off of just what it looks like, where you're at, the setting, the vacation, the smiles, right, and actually into the activities, because takes a short amount of time to take a beautiful picture in Greece, and then you can go fight, for hours, or
Right,
you can go drink too much.
You're in the hotel fighting the whole rest
You
of
can
the
get a second
evening.
hotel room for that night.
Yeah.
Like you don't see anything behind the scenes. So I think seeing people interact together is a more realistic portrayal.
I think, that's so interesting. Adding like that agentic element, right? That task-focused element to it, and giving you and your partner an excuse to do something together, and then sharing that with the world. I think it can help reinforce like healthy relationship functioning, where it's like, well, it's not just all lovey-dovey. Like, we're doing things together. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Good.
Okay.
So
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Back to social comparison. I kind of drew this little chart here of like upward, downward, positive, negative, and there's kind of this strata of like jealousy is next to motivation, right? So you could either be jealous and say, I don't have that, or I'm about to lose that, or you can be like, I'm going to keep it and I'm going to be motivated.
Oh, yeah. You know what I'm thinking of right now? I'm thinking of like the term relationship fat. You know what I'm talking about? Like when you get into a relationship and you kind of let yourself go because you're not like quote unquote trying anymore.
This is a metaphor, not like...
No, this is a real thing.
Or like, are you talking about weight gain?
I'm talking about actual physical weight gain.
Okay, yeah.
It doesn't
you
always...
get happy the honeymoon,
It always doesn't... It doesn't
you go out
always,
to eat a lot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not always necessarily weight gain, but it's like you get into a relationship, you get comfortable. Maybe you're not going to the gym as much. Maybe you're not taking care of your diet as much.
Stop hanging out with your friends.
You're not doing things as much. Exactly. The colloquialism is relationship fat. And I think that one of the things you can do to escape those feelings of guilt is... I like your little table because that's what the motivation makes me think of. Where it's like I want to be motivated not just to preserve my relationship, but to like be the best version of myself.
Yeah, sure, yeah. And then like on the other side, on the downward, there's also motivation. There's either scorn, for the downward comparison. You can either kind of judge someone else and say, I'm not in that situation. You messed up. I would never do that.
Yeah, could never be me.
Or you could appraise yourself, right? Like self-appraisal and say, I can see that some of the things that I do could align with this negative thing. And so I'm going to change that. So I think that these are some of the positive things that can happen.
Yeah.
But you have to act, I think for social comparison theory to be at its best, you have to kind of stay in that pragmatic, what can I take from this? How can this become a positive thing for me and my life?
Yeah.
But it can also obviously go the other way where, I'm not satisfying this. I'm not doing a good job. My relationship's terrible.
That's the balance.
And I think one of the thread throughout all of this that's kind of unspoken is money and resources and influence and popularity. And we live in a time now where influencers who maybe didn't even graduate high school are having like the broadest,
exorbitantly wealthy and having these experiences. And you're right. Especially if you're somebody who's like worked very hard and you have a career and like things are going right and you're like, why is this person who I feel like I've worked just as hard as, if not harder, having all these amazing experiences that I wish I could have and don't. And that's the dangerous part of the social comparison.
And also like it seems that a lot of these people that have that are not happy and end up kind of having imposter syndrome. I feel like Justin Bieber going through that right now, if not forever.
I know, poor guy.
Yeah, it's like I almost feel bad for him, but like
it's hard to feel bad for a billionaire,
but also like it wasn't his choice, right? To be like a 5-year-old that's great at drums.
Child stars are.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. So this actually leads me very nicely into the last question that I have for you, which is, as we explore the internet, specifically when it comes to like relationship building, we're going to see a lot of content like this, right? That some of this like fake relationship content, whether it's like relationship coaches or people like presenting their relationships as better than they are. What are some tactics that we can use to recognize that those might not be as real as they look? And how can we like manage our own relationship expectations so that we're not constantly comparing ourselves and our relationship to something that doesn't exist?
Sure. Well, I think the first step is to have a very clear and firm and evolving and communicative relationship with your partner, right? Like if you are watching something else and you're asking yourself like, why don't me and my partner do that? Like, why don't you ask your partner that, you know? And in terms of fake relationships, I don't know, like even relationships that are perhaps manufactured or manipulated, you know, that's still a relationship, you know? So just kind of, you know, if something looks too good to be true, it is, right?
Usually.
Yeah, it typically is. Like
I think about those couples who are like, oh, well, we've been married 30 years and we've never fought. And I'm like...
Yeah, I just saw that. Yeah, George Clooney was saying him
like,
and Amal have
really?
never had an argument.
Yeah, I'm like,
I
maybe...
feel like I'd like to
maybe.
ask her.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Do you agree?
Maybe you think that.
Yeah, George Clooney with jet black sprayed on hair. Like, just, you've never... I mean, just the hubris of saying such a thing. What does that achieve for the world?
Well,
right?
I think
and then he
that's-
says that and isn't like, and this is how we do it. He's just like, nope, we just don't.
Well, I think that's
and
the
I
problem.
just feel like that clearly they're... I think it's healthy to have conflict.
Yes, that's the
right?
problem. It's bad. You're presenting something that's bad in a way that's good. We've never had an argument.
Yeah.
Maybe you've never had.
I mean,
an
she's
argument.
like, I just had an argument with you yesterday at breakfast.
Yeah,
you
so what
know,
are you talking
like,
about?
Like, why didn't that count? Yeah, yeah,
yeah. No, and
Yeah.
I think you're touching on an important issue, which is power.
Yeah.
Right. When you're the powerful actor in the relationship, it's really easy to say that, right? Because maybe you're suffering from a demand withdrawal pattern, which we've talked about on this show years ago.
Yeah.
But right, maybe it feels like you've never had a conflict because every time your partner tries to initiate one, you just poo-poo and you shoo away. So yeah, maybe it feels that way to you, and that could be indicative of a larger problem. So to tie that back into the issue, when we see people say things like that, we got to remember, one, that's a red flag. That's a sign of something that's not healthy. And two, just because they're saying it doesn't mean it's true.
right. Yeah, and I'd also add, you know, thinking about some tactics of how to not get sucked into like fake manufactured relationships that, you know, are posed or, you know, and so on. I think it's important to be familiar, you know, with our individual personal vulnerabilities as well as how those are amplified or, you know, helped out with our partner. You know, like people are different people. And so, you know, like if you're comparing you and your partner to like another couple, they aren't you, right? You're not either one of them.
Right.
They have and everybody has things going on in their lives. Everyone has pressures and stuff, and they may be familiar to you or unfamiliar, relatable, unrelatable, but everybody has those. So when, you know, when the video stops, you know, or how many takes did this take? Like just be sure. I would just you know, encourage people to look to the people that they actually know that have long relationships. Like my parents have been married for 52 years, 51 years, 50 years. Yeah. Last summer, 51 years.
Yeah. Wow.
This summer. Yeah. So like, but I've seen them my whole life evolve and like level up, you know, but that wasn't easy. They went through various periods where it was more difficult to get along. But what they always really modeled for my brother and I was that it is okay to have disagreements.
Yeah.
It's not okay to like yell or, you know, get crazy or, you know, like just it's important to address, you know, when you have disagreements to address them and, you know, apologize. Don't go to bed angry. But you know, seeing them, you know, for how long they've been married, you might think, oh, that's smooth sailing. No, like everything is work. Any kind of friendships are work, right? Like romantic
All
relationships
are work.
They are,
for sure.
if you don't want to put that work in, then you know you're going to be more vulnerable to idealized portrayals. You know.
Yeah, I think that this is like a central theme here when it comes to the internet is that like people, and this is especially true of Westerners, we want instant gratification. We want something that we can just reach out and grab and hold, and it's ours, and it's perfect as is, and it requires no work, and it's right here, right now. And unfortunately, that's just not how relationships work, man.
Yeah.
Like maybe you can get that with like plastic surgery or like a collectible. I just got an awesome new collectible in my life, and it's perfect. It's everything I ever wanted, but it's not a human, right?
Yeah.
Humans require work.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the challenge, you know, and the reward is to be able to do that together.
All right. Well, if you can believe it, we have reached the end of our time together. How do you feel about that, Shelley?
Oh, I'm so sad.
I know.
I want to stay here forever.
I know. I feel like we could get into this even deeper, but we did have a limited amount of episodes this season. I'm planning on doing one more like solo episode. I don't know when I'll be able to do that. We're moving buildings. There's travel plans. It's the end of the semester. So for now, what I'll just say is thank you to everyone listening. Thank you to all my guests. I really appreciate it. I'm looking very forward to graduation this semester. We're going to be indoors. That will be nice.
Yay.
I know. So anyway, best of luck with final projects, final exams, and to those teaching, best of luck with grading. We will see you next time.
Take care.
You've been listening to Red Rock Relationships, a podcast about communication. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time. If you'd like to be on the show or have questions for us, please send us an email to redrockrelationships@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Just search Red Rock Relationships. Thank you again. And remember, it all begins with good communication. This has been a production from a podcast studio.